It was a cloudy afternoon, the sky hanging heavy with mourning as if even nature itself had paused in respect. The gentle hum of whispered condolences drifted through the chapel like a slow, sorrowful song. People moved quietly, dressed in black, their eyes red-rimmed with grief or politeness. The smell of lilies, my mother's favorite, filled the air, mixing with the scent of incense and the faint traces of old wood. I sat silently in the front row, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, knuckles pale. I hadn't cried yet. Not really. My heart felt like a stone, lodged deep somewhere behind my ribs. My mother was gone, my anchor, my confidant, my protector. Losing her felt like stepping into a cold, unfamiliar world without a coat. There were too many people and too many words being said, yet none of it mattered. She was gone. As the priest began reading prayers, I looked around at the crowd. Some people were genuinely grieving. Others had simply shown up out of obligation. I noticed a few old family friends I hadn't seen in years. Distant cousins stood together awkwardly. People whispered memories about her, stories of her kindness, her stubbornness, her laugh that could fill a room. I listened, but it all sounded distant, like echoes from another life. Beside me sat my husband, Mark. His hand rested gently on my shoulder, a picture of Cam's support. He wore the right expression, serious, sorrowful, and nodded sympathetically as people came up to offer their condolences. He said all the right things, played the role of the grieving son-in-law perfectly. I wanted to lean on him. I wanted to believe in the comfort his presence was supposed to provide. But something inside me stayed guarded, distant. A flicker of unease stirred deep within me. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept drifting across the room. Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off today. More than the grief, more than the loss. A strange tension hung in the air, unspoken and yet undeniable. A shadow behind the sadness. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was raw with emotion, too vulnerable to trust my own instincts. But a voice inside me whispered otherwise. Something was coming, something I wasn't ready for, and it would all begin before the day was over. As the service continued, my eyes wandered again across the room, not out of distraction, but restlessness, a pull I couldn't explain, as if my instincts were trying to draw my attention towards something that hadn't yet revealed itself. And then, I saw her. She stood alone at the back, just behind the final row of pews. I didn't recognize her, not immediately. She wasn't family. She wasn't one of my mother's friends. I was sure of that. Tall, poised, and dressed in a black dress that seemed just a little too stylish for a funeral. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, chin lifted, as though she were posing for an audience no one else could see. She had long dark hair pinned back in a sleek twist, with a pair of sunglasses perched atop her head, despite the dim indoor lighting. And then I saw it, the necklace. A delicate, vintage gold piece with a ruby pendant that shimmered even under the soft glow of the chapel lights. My breath hitched. I knew that necklace. I had seen it in my mother's jewelry box more times than I could count. It had been hers since she was a teenager, a gift from her own mother. It had gone missing months ago, along with several other pieces, we'd assumed misplaced or quietly taken by someone careless. But here it was, around the neck of a woman none of us knew. I stayed longer, as my heart started to pick up pace. Her earrings, small, emerald drops, also looked familiar. Another pair I hadn't seen since before the disappearance. Matching bangles, the thin kind my mother only wore on special occasions, glinted on the woman's wrist when she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. This wasn't coincidence. She wasn't just a stranger. She was wearing my mother's missing jewelry. I leaned slightly toward Mark and opened my mouth to whisper something, but stopped. His gaze wasn't on me. It was on her. And then she toned, as if she'd sensed me watching her. Her eyes met mine, cool and unreadable. She smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with something else. Something smug. A smile that carried meaning. A statement. I looked away, unsettled. I could feel the atmosphere around her shift. A few people glanced in her direction and quickly turned back. Some whispered. No one greeted her. No one approached. She seemed completely alone, and completely unfazed by it. Questions began stacking in my mind like bricks. Who was she? Why was she here? How did she get that jewelry? And why was my husband looking at her like that? My fingers curled slowly into fists on my lap. I didn't know who she was yet. But I knew this. She wasn't just here to mourn. It had been nearly 4 months ago when the jewelry first went missing. At the time, it didn't feel like a crime, more like an unfortunate accident. My mother had called me late one evening, her voice trembling, asking if I'd borrowed her ruby necklace, the one with the intricate floral design and the single deep red stone that caught the light like a flame. I hadn't, of course. I rarely wore jewelry at all. When we went through her drawers together the next day, the necklace was gone. So were a pair of emerald earrings, several antique gold bangles, and a sapphire ring that had belonged to her grandmother. We searched everywhere, drawers, closets, even under furniture, but there was no trace. Nothing broken, no signs of a break-in. It was all just gone. We hesitated to report it at first. Mom said maybe she'd misplaced them during a recent trip. But weeks passed, and nothing turned up. The police eventually filed a theft report, but it led nowhere. No leads. No suspects. She never wanted to talk about it again after that. She seemed more hurt than angry, as if something sacred had been violated. That jewelry was more than decoration. It was history, family, memory. The collection had been appraised years earlier at just over $400,000. A staggering amount, but Mom never saw it in terms of value. To her, each piece had a story. She used to say, "Gold holds memories better than photos." And now, there it was, right in front of me. I couldn't stop staring at the necklace around that woman's neck. I could trace every detail of its design from memory. I had seen it my whole life. I had even borrowed it once, on my wedding day. It wasn't just similar. It was the same piece. A part of me wanted to stand up, right there in the middle of the chapel, and demand she take it off. I wanted to drag her to the front and scream, "This doesn't belong to you." I wanted answers, but another part of me stayed frozen. My mother's casket was just feet away. The quiet sobs of family and friends echoed through the space. Could I really cause a scene here? Now, my mind began to race. If she had the necklace, could she have taken it? Or had someone given it to her? Someone who had access to my mother's things. Someone like Mark. I glanced at him again, trying to read his face. But he was stone still, staring straight ahead. It was too much to process all at once. My grief collided with rage, confusion, and the chilling possibility that this was not just a chance encounter, that this woman hadn't come here out of respect. She had come here to be seen. I couldn't sit still any longer. My hands were trembling, but my feet moved on their own, carrying me down the aisle toward her. The service was still going, but the words of the priest had long since faded into a blur behind the pounding in my chest. I kept my eyes fixed on the woman in black, on that necklace, my mother's necklace, and the expressionless mask she wore like armor. She saw me coming, of course. I was sure she'd been waiting for it. Her eyes locked with mine again, as calm as ever, as if we were about to exchange polite greetings at a dinner party. I stopped just a few feet away from her, trying to keep my voice low, though it felt like thunder was rolling through my throat. "Where did you get that necklace?" I asked, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. Her lips curled into a smirk, slow, deliberate, poisonous. "He gave it to me himself," she said. I stared at her, waiting for her to elaborate. She didn't. Her words hung there like smoke. Her tone wasn't confused or defensive. It wasn't even apologetic. It was triumphant, like she had waited for this moment, wanted this moment. The world around us seemed to shift. A few people nearby began to notice, heads turning just slightly in our direction. A soft murmur rolled through the back rows like wind through dry leaves. "He?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She tilted her head slightly, amused. "Mark," she said, "your husband." The air left my lungs in one brutal sweep. I felt it like a blow, solid, sharp, deep. For a moment I thought I might collapse. My fingers twitched, itching to reach for the necklace, to tear it from her throat. But I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the truth carve its shape inside me. I could feel eyes on us now. People were definitely watching. Whispers rippled outward like circles in water. I knew I had to say something, to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. The betrayal hit harder than I could have imagined. Not just the theft, not just the affair, but the audacity to bring her here, to my mother's funeral, to let her wear the very jewelry that had vanished from my mother's room like a ghost. Still smirking, she reached up and gently touched the pendant, letting it rest against her fingers like a prize. Her gaze never left mine. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a declaration. I turned away, unable to breathe. Behind me, I could hear the priest wrapping up his prayer. The final hymn began to play softly over the speakers. But for me, the funeral had already ended. Something else had begun in its place. Something cold. Something unforgivable. It didn't happen all at once. Like most betrayals, it started with the smallest of shifts, things so easy to overlook that I convinced myself they weren't real. But now, standing in the wreckage of that moment at the funeral, every memory began to sharpen. Every lie returned with its full weight. I remembered the first time Mark came home late without texting. He said he had stayed behind at work to help with a last-minute presentation. He looked tired, sure, but not drained. His shirt was too neatly tucked, his cologne still fresh. I had asked casually, "Did you eat already?" He said no, then hesitated. Just a flicker, just enough to raise something in me I ignored. Then came the phone calls. Unknown numbers he'd answer in another room. He always returned calm, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Work drama, he'd say, or nothing important. I believed him, because I wanted to, because marriage, I thought, required trust. It wasn't just me who noticed, though. My mother had a way of seeing things I refused to see. One afternoon, over tea, she looked at me with a sadness that hadn't yet turned into words. "Is Mark happy?" she asked gently. I laughed it off. "He's just busy. You know how his job is." She didn't push, but her eyes stayed on me a moment too long. Then there was the day she visited our place when I was out. She never told me exactly what she found, only that a few of her things seemed to be in different places than where she'd left them. She mentioned her sapphire ring, how she thought she saw it in a different box, one she hadn't opened. At the time, it sounded like forgetfulness. I reassured her. I defended him. Now, I see it clearly. The secrets were all there. I just wasn't ready to look at them. I remember a weekend away we had cancelled. Mark claimed he was too swamped. But a week later, I saw charges on our joint credit card from a hotel and a dinner for two. He told me it was a business meeting with a client. He said he'd forgotten to tell me. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People forget. Things get overlooked. I wanted to keep the peace. And so, I silenced my instincts, one by one. I told myself stories. I convinced myself that loyalty meant staying, even when doubt knocked louder than love. But now, after everything, I stood in the aftermath and said the words that had been trying to surface for months. I should have known. I wasn't just mourning my mother. I was mourning my blindness, my willingness to see only what I wanted, and my failure to see the truth staring right at me in stolen gold in a stranger's smack. As the final hymn faded and the chapel began to empty, I felt a presence approach, quiet but purposeful. I turned to see a man in a plain dark coat standing a few feet away. He looked out of place, not because of his clothes, but because of his focus. While everyone else wore sorrow or awkward politeness, his eyes held precision. He wasn't here to mourn. "Mrs. Carver?" he asked softly. I nodded, still feeling the echo of shock in my chest. He took a slow step forward and lowered his voice. "I'm Detective Grant. I've been handling your mother's stolen jewelry case." The room seemed to go still around us. I couldn't find my voice, so I just stared at him. He glanced discreetly in the direction of the woman in black, who was still standing at the back of the chapel, now casually speaking to someone I didn't recognize. She looked calm, unbothered. "That necklace she's wearing," he said, "along with the bangles and earrings, they are part of the exact collection listed in your mother's theft report." My breath caught again. "You're sure?" He nodded without hesitation. 100%. I've reviewed the appraisal records and photographs from the insurance files. The design details, the ruby pendant, the floral clasp, even the fine notching on the bangles, they are all unique. These aren't duplicates. I tried to absorb his words, but my thoughts were spinning. How did you know she'd be here? We didn't, he said, but we've been watching movement on some of the missing pieces. One surfaced at a private appraisal last month. Someone tried to get a valuation on the sapphire ring. We traced it back to your husband's financials. When we learned of your mother's passing and saw the funeral notice, we thought it might be a good moment to observe. So they had been watching, waiting, and now they had seen what they needed. Why didn't you come sooner? I asked, my voice cracking. We needed to be sure, and now we are. I felt my knees weaken. What happens next? Detective Grant lowered his voice further. That depends. We can approach her now. Detain both of them for questioning, your husband and the woman. But it will be public. Loud. It will turn this day into something else entirely. I looked around. My mother's casket hadn't even been lowered yet. Family still stewed in small, grieving clusters. The weight of the day was already more than enough. Or, he continued, we wait. Let the ceremony finish. Let the guests leave. And then we handle it quietly. It's your call. It felt impossible. Both choices came with consequences. To act now would mean truth in the open, pain without delay. But to wait meant allowing them even one more moment of peace they didn't deserve. My heart was torn between dignity and justice, between mourning and rage. And I knew, either way, life as I knew it was already gone. The chapel had nearly emptied, but I remained frozen in place, eyes on the two people who had shattered the last thread of calm I had left. My mother's funeral, her final moment, now hung in the balance. Not between life and death, but between truth and silence. Detective Grant stood beside me quietly, respectfully giving me space, but I could feel the weight of his presence. He had offered me a choice, and the clock was ticking. I stayed down the aisle toward the casket, trying to picture what my mother would have wanted. Justice, or dignity. Inside me, a war was raging. The thought of Mark and her walking away from this, even for another hour, was unbearable. They didn't deserve to smile, to comfort each other in the parking lot, to pretend they were innocent. Every second they wore that life felt like another betrayal. The jewelry sparkled like trophies stolen from a battlefield they never fought on. But what about my family? My aunts, cousins, friends, still gathered in the lobby, hugging, crying, clutching folded tissues and whispered memories. If I turned this sacred goodbye into a scene, if officers came in with handcuffs and flashing badges, that would be their last memory of my mother. Not her life, not her grace, but chaos, scandal. And then there was the media. My mother's name would be tied to theft, to infidelity, to courtroom drama and headlines that had nothing to do with who she really was. Could I do that to her? To all of us? I looked at Detective Grant. If we wait, I asked, can you still make sure they don't disappear? That they're dealt with? He nodded. We have eyes on them. If they leave, they won't get far. But the longer we delay, the more complicated it becomes. Emotions cool. Evidence fades. They may start preparing a defense. I thought of Mark's face, that cold stillness during the funeral, that silent guilt he wore like a well-pressed suit. I had loved him once. I had trusted him. I had given him my whole self. Now, I had to decide how to destroy what remained. I don't want this moment ruined for everyone else, I said quietly, my voice firmer than I expected. My mother deserves peace. She deserves respect. Detective Grant gave a respectful nod. Understood. But I also want them held accountable. Every stolen second, every stolen thing. I want them to know this isn't over. He gave a slight smile. We'll wait until the guests leave. Then we move in. I exhaled slowly. The decision was made, not out of fear, but out of love. I would honor my mother in silence, and then I would demand justice in full volume. As I turned back toward the casket, I whispered under my breath, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. But I see it now. And soon, they would see what happens when a woman has nothing left to lose. As the last of the mourners filtered out and the chapel doors closed behind them, the air shifted. The quiet now felt sharper, more late, like the room itself was holding its breath. Detective Grant stepped aside to speak into his radio, his voice low and clipped. Moments later, two officers in plain clothes appeared near the side exit, blending easily into the shadows. Before we approached them, the detective said, turning back to me, "There's something you need to know." I braced myself. "We've been digging into your husband's records for a few weeks now," he continued. "We originally focused on the jewelry theft, but as we followed the paper trail, we uncovered something much bigger." My heart dropped. "There are signs of multiple insurance claims filed in your mother's name. Some for lost valuables, others for property damage that never actually happened. The documents were forged. All of them. The payouts were traced to shell accounts, accounts connected to your husband." I blinked, stunned. "Are you saying Mark was stealing from her? From my mother?" He nodded grimly. "It looks like he was slowly bleeding her finances for at least a year, maybe longer. We found payments from those accounts that matched deposits in his name, and transfers to the woman standing back there in your mother's jewelry." The words barely registered. Everything around me blurred for a moment. My body was there, but my mind was tumbling through 1,000 fractured memories. The tension in my mother's voice when she talked about missing paperwork, her hesitation to let Mark handle things, the quiet withdrawal in her final months. He hadn't just cheated on me. He hadn't just stolen from my family. He had orchestrated a slow, calculated betrayal of the woman who welcomed him in. And now, the cracks were showing on the other side. From across the chapel, the woman, his mistress, was no longer smirking. She was pacing near the back wall, whispering fiercely into her phone. Her posture had stiffened, her brows pulled into a frantic knot. She knew, or at least, she knew something had changed. "She's spooked," the detective said, following my gaze. "She probably realizes this isn't just about a necklace anymore." I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We let her panic," he said. "Guilt loosens tongues. Desperation makes mistakes." A flashback hit me, one I hadn't thought of in months. Mark, sitting at our kitchen table, showing my mother how to sign into her online bank account. "It's just easier if I manage it," he had said with that practiced smile. "Less for you to worry about." And she had agreed. Because we trusted him. Because I trusted him. And now, it was all unraveling. Every lie, every forged signature, every whispered call behind closed doors. The funeral was over, but the real reckoning had just begun. The air felt thick with tension as the detective gave a nod toward the officers. They started to move, and with every step, the past fell further behind, and the truth moved in to take its place. Outside the chapel, the soft hum of fading conversation hung in the air. The guests were beginning to disperse, hugging, offering final condolences, preparing to return to lives untouched by the storm that was about to break open. I stood just outside the entrance, the weight of everything pressing into my chest like a stone. Detective Grant gave a subtle nod. The officers moved in. It all happened with terrifying precision and eerie quiet. One officer approached Mark from the side, speaking in a low, firm voice. Another went directly to her, the woman who had stolen so much more than jewelry. For a split second, they both looked confused. Then, realization hit like lightning. Mark's eyes widened. "Wait, there's a mistake," he said, raising his hands. "I haven't done anything wrong." The woman, who had worn smugness like a second skin all day, turned sharp and defensive. "What is this? Are you serious? I was invited here." They were calm at first, but panic set in quickly. "What the hell is going on?" Mark demanded, looking at me now, as if I were the one betraying him. "You know what this is," I said, voice trembling. "Don't lie to me. Not now." Some of the guests turned toward the commotion. A few had lingered by the cars, exchanging kind words and quiet grief. Now they stood frozen, watching the officers place handcuffs around wrists that had once touched mine. Gasps rippled through the air. One of my mother's old friends whispered, "Is that Mark?" Another clutched her chest. "What's happening?" "I didn't do this," Mark said again, voice rising, as if volume could erase guilt. The woman tried to back away, as though she could step out of this scene entirely. "You said everything was taken care of," she shouted at him, eyes wild. The detectives didn't react. They'd seen it before. I stood motionless, arms at my sides, not knowing if I felt like running or collapsing. The pain hit all at once. Not just the betrayal, not just the public exposure, but the final, irreversible collapse of the life I thought I had. My husband, my home, my mother, gone. I crumbled onto the chapel steps, my knees finally giving out. Someone caught me, a cousin, maybe. Someone kind. Someone crying too. "Oh my God," another guest whispered nearby. She had no idea. A woman I barely knew wrapped her arms around me. "You don't deserve this," she whispered. "None of this is your fault." But I couldn't speak. I couldn't nod. All I could do was cry. Silent, guttural sobs that felt older than today, that had waited years to be released. The police cars pulled away slowly, taking with them not just two criminals, but every illusion I'd clung to. My mother's funeral should have been a goodbye, but it had become an unmasking. And in that devastation, something else began. Not healing yet, but truth. Raw, unforgiving truth. Weeks turned into months. The media frenzy came and went, just as Detective Grant had predicted. Headlines flashed for a while. Widow's grief uncovers $400,000 jewelry heist, but soon faded into the noise of newer scandals. The court proceedings dragged on, painfully slow. Mark's lawyers tried to twist the story, spinning manipulation into misunderstanding, love into miscommunication. But the evidence was ironclad. The forged documents, the fake accounts, the surveillance. The mistress quickly flipped under pressure, cutting a deal in exchange for testimony. I attended every hearing, not out of vengeance, but to be seen, to show them I would not disappear, not bury my pain in silence. I sat in the gallery, composed, present, and watched them squirm under the weight of truth. But when it all became too much, when the court walls felt too close, or the lawyers' voices too cruel, I would go to her. My mother's grave sat beneath a large maple tree at the edge of the cemetery. I visited often, bringing fresh white lilies, the kind she always loved. I would sit there, not speaking aloud, but thinking everything I never had the chance to say. I told her about the betrayal, the courtroom, the way people looked at me like I was both a victim and a mystery. I told her I missed her, fiercely, endlessly. And then, one day, I stopped telling her about them. Instead, I spoke of new things. A new job I'd taken in a neighboring city. A small apartment I was slowly making my own, one quiet enough to hear my thoughts again. A rescue dog named Mabel who didn't trust easily, but had the same watchful eyes my mother once had. I was learning to be alone without feeling empty. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, shifted, became something I could carry instead of something that carried me. On the day the final verdict was handed down, guilty on all counts, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I simply stood up, walked out of the courtroom, and exhaled like I had been holding my breath for years. That evening, I visited my mother one last time before leaving town. "I did what I had to," I whispered. "And I think you would have been proud." The wind stirred through the trees, and I let myself believe she heard me. I didn't look back when I walked away. Not at the grave, not at the courtroom, not at the life I had once so carefully built on fault lines. Somewhere ahead, something new was waiting. It wasn't love. Not yet. Not trust. But something smaller, quieter, peace. And as I stepped into that quiet, I knew one thing for certain. They took so much from me, but not everything.